Hello, everybody, and welcome to a segment I'm calling Over and Underrated Cards. In this segment, I'm going to be going through the cards in Dominaria that I think are prone to being over or underrated. These are cards that I have learned the true value of after playing many drafts of Dominaria. So if you're new to the format or you haven't played it in a while, this will hopefully give you an advantage over your competitors who are playing cards that are not ideal in the format, and you have the advantage of not having to play those cards and therefore having better decks. If you enjoy this type of video, remember to leave a comment in the comment section down below letting me know your thoughts. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button to support future videos of this type, and subscribe to the channel to support the growth of the channel and to join the community. Without further ado, let's get into it. I think first up we're going to start with Aven Sentry. Aven Sentry is a card that is going to be typically underrated in this set. 4-mana 3/2 flyer doesn't look impressive, especially in a set as powerful as Dominaria, but Aven Sentry is actually one of the better white commons. That being said, white is not one of the better colors in Dominaria, another thing you should probably be aware of, but Aven Sentry can get the job done, especially if your deck is more aggressive, though I tend to avoid drafting that kind of deck. Next up, I want to talk about, Knight of Dominaria. 2-mana 3/1s are traditionally cards that vary in power level from set to set on whether they're good, and in Dominaria, Knight of Dominaria is just not a very good card. There are just tons of 1/1 saprolings running around, so Knight of Dominaria is not particularly good, and is overall a card that you should be very unhappy playing in your deck. Mesa Unicorn is also a card that was not super impressive to me in the set. 2-mana 2/2s are just not where you want to be in the set. The ground can get stalled very easily, and even though 2-mana 2/2s are good in some lifelinks are good in some formats, this is not one of those formats. On Sarah's Wings, however, is quite powerful. The combination of flying, vigilance, and lifelink means that it's going to win you a lot of races. The combination with Coldwater Snapper is also super impressive. And On Sarah's Wings, even though it's an aura, and people are oftentimes thinking that auras are not very good, On Sarah's Wings is actually quite good. So I think that card is a lot of time tricky to rate for people if they have not played the format. I do want to take a brief moment to talk about Sergeant at Arms, because I do believe Sergeant at Arms is a card that will be overrated by most people who have not played the format. It just turns out that both halves of this card are not that great, so even though it has the flexibility of being castable at 3 mana or 6 mana, the card overall suffered and was not very good. Triumph of Gerard is the final card I want to talk about in white, and I just want to mention that this card is overrated a lot by newer players to the format. Triumph of Gerard was just not playable. There's too much removal running around, and Triumph of Gerard just doesn't do enough and is too slow to be good. So don't play Triumph of Gerard if you want to win. In moving on to the blue cards, I think Arcane Flight, specifically combined with Coldwater Snapper, is a card that is going to be underrated by a lot of people. That little combination of Arcane Flight and Coldwater Snapper, I'll get to Coldwater Snapper in a second. It's a 6-mana 4/5 hexproof card. That combination can win you the late game. It can stall you the game very effectively, giving you a great blocker, and is overall something that you need to be aware of in the format. So I think Arcane Flight is going to be more playable than people give it credit for. Next up, I do want to say Cloud Reader Sphinx is probably the best common in the set, pretty much. It's so good. It's weird how good the card is, but Cloud Reader Sphinx is a card that I think if you haven't played a ton of Dominaria, it's weird to think that it's the first pick common out of every pack, pretty much. But this card was just incredible. It's one of the reasons blue is so good, and Cloud Reader Sphinx is excellent. Coldwater Snapper doesn't look like much, 6 mana for a 4/5 hexproof, but it's a brutal combo with On Sarah's Wings. It's also pretty good with Arcane Flight, and overall just holds the ground very well. So Coldwater Snapper is a card that's going to be better than you think it is. Another card that's way better than you think it is Divination. Divination is unbelievable in this set. You'll play pretty much any number of Divinations you get. You'll take them very highly. It's the second best blue common after Cloud Reader Sphinx, which is just bizarre. But this card is very good. Take pretty much every copy you can get your hands on and then just play them and win the game. It's just that simple. This card was very good in the format, and a card that you might not think is going to be very good, because in other formats it's just very mediocre. But definitely prioritize those Divinations if you are new to Dominaria. You'll be glad you did. Next up, I want to bring up Opt. Opt is a card that's playable constructed, and so people always like to play this type of card in limited, and it just isn't very good. Opt is the type of card that just kind of goes through your deck and doesn't really find what you need. You'd much rather have cards like Divination that actually give you card advantage rather than Opt, which can just dig you a little bit deeper, but oftentimes doesn't accomplish a ton. Finally, I do want to talk about two more cards in blue. Time of Ice is a card that looks very powerful, but is only really good in the aggressive blue decks, and there aren't a ton of those. Sometimes blue-red Wizards can have an aggressive tilt to it, but a lot of the times it won't, and it'll be more of a controlling deck, and Time of Ice just doesn't really do a ton in decks that aren't proactive. So be careful when you play Time of Ice. I think it's going to be overrated generally. And then finally, Bodalian Arcanist was an incredible card in this format. It just does a lot of the things you want it to do. It's a wizard for relevant synergies, and there are just a ton of instants and sorceries that you want to be casting. It helps you cast those divinations to find your extra land drops. And overall, Vidalian Arcanist was a card that, even though I called it Vidalcan Arcanist for pretty much the entire format instead of Vidalian Arcanist, it was just a very good card and a card you should be playing pretty much every time in your blue decks. It just works out really nicely, especially with cards like Syncopate, and it's just a great card. So Vidalian Arcanist definitely going to be underrated a lot of the time. Moving on to the black cards, I do want to mention briefly Calico Skin, which this card is pretty strong. It looks relatively okay, but it's just a card that fills your curve, and a lot of times you don't want to cast it on turn 2 because you do want to get that value later on. You have to really consider whether or not you are going to need a blocker on turn 2, and otherwise you generally just try to save your skin, which if you can. So I think this card is going to be underrated a lot of the time, even though, I mean just all of the 1/3s with Kicker are just generally pretty good. Moving on, Chainer's Torment is unplayable. It is just too slow, and overall the token's just too easy to kill. Final Parting is not very playable in this format. It's just 5 mana, and the graveyard part is not very relevant. So Final Parting is the type of card that people kind of like, but generally you're not going to have a card that's strong enough to warrant paying 5 mana to go get it. I don't know why people like this kind of effect in Limited, probably because they just think, oh, I'm getting my best card. But Final Parting is the type of card that is just not a card you want to be playing. Fungal Infection is a card you can play like 1 copy of. I think this card is another one that people often like, but generally it's not going to be as powerful as you think it is. 1 copy is fine, but anything more than that, you're going to kind of struggle to find uses, because the 1 toughness creatures in this format are already so bad because there are so many saplings running around that you oftentimes struggle to get value out of the first copy, and any more than that, and you really do struggle to get value. It can be used to kill 2/2s in a pinch if they attack, and you get it -1/-1, and then block, but overall, you don't really want to run too many copies of Fungal Infection. Lich's Mastery is a card that's really cute to run, and you actually can run it in certain decks, but I would highly recommend avoiding running this card if you are a newer player to the format, because it's very complicated to draft decks around it, and is something that I think is a little bit more advanced, and you probably shouldn't be going for it all that much. Thallid Omnivore may not look like much, but this card is actually very good, especially in the black-green Saprolings archetype. 4 mana 3/3 that can eat the other Saprolings that you'll have running around, gain you some life to win races, and overall be very difficult to block is just very good. A lot of the time you can have like 4 Saprolings sitting around, and then this card threatens to deal like 9 damage all by itself, which means your opponent is going to have to chump block it because they'll just die out of nowhere. So Thallid Omnivore, a card you should be prioritizing a little bit higher than you might think. And finally, in the black cards, Whisper Bloodliturgist might seem very tricky to evaluate, but this card ends up being very good. You can sacrifice itself, you can sacrifice random saplings, and a lot of the time you're going to have powerful creatures to get back with Whisper Bloodliturgist, and it's going to be very good in your deck. It's also legendary for random things that care about that, and is overall a card that is very good in the format. Moving on to red. We're going to start off very simple. Champion of the Flame just never panned out. There's too much good removal, and you're never going to be able to get there on Champion of the Flame, so just avoid this card if you are new to the format, and you like just anywhere in the format, just don't play this card. Next, I would like to mention Gitu Chronicler. This card may not look impressive, but it has some very good loops, especially if you have Soul Salvage. You can just use Soul Salvage endlessly to get back Gitu Chronicler, and Gitu Chronicler is just a very strong card, one of the better red commons, and something you should be trying to prioritize if you are in red, and then pick up a couple of instants and sorceries. There's just a lot of removal at instants and sorcery, and Gitu Chronicler is a very good card. Gitu Journey Mage, on the other hand, happily known as the pizza delivery guy by some people, is just not very good. You're trying not to be, I think in Dominaria one of the keys is to be patient, and Gitu Journey Mage is a very impatient card. 3 mana 3/2 that kind of needs another wizard on turn 2 to be aggressive and get damage in is just not really where you want to be, so I would recommend against playing cards like Gitu Journey Mage that are kind of more aggressively tilted. Next up in red, Keldon Overseer is a card I really do want to talk about. This card looks fine, but in reality is just quite bad. There's just too many things that punish 1 toughness creatures, and even though at 7 mana you get to steal something and potentially get a huge swing in, a lot of the times you're not going to be able to just wait until turn 7 to play your Keldon Overseer, and you're going to be stuck with a 3 mana 3/1 that just trades with a Saproling at a disadvantage, and a Saproling that your opponent got for basically free. So Keldon Overseer just not very playable, and try to avoid playing that card. I think it's pretty much unplayable in this format, even though it looks like a solid card. And then finally, the final card I want to talk about is Skizzik. Skizzik has some resemblance to cards like Charging Monstrosaur, the 5-mana 5/5 Trample Haste, but the thing that is different with Skizzik is that it has only 3 toughness, and that actually is a big deal. It oftentimes means that it's going to trade for a 3-drop, and as a 5-drop creature, essentially, you don't really want that trading with a 3-drop. It's just a little bit too fragile. So Skizzik, I think, is going to be generally overrated. It's not unplayable like some of the overrated cards I have been mentioning, but it's not a card you want to prioritize early. It's also a very aggressive card, and aggressive cards are just generally worse in Dominaria. So try not to prioritize Skizzik too highly if you are in a red deck. Moving on to green, we're going to start off immediately. There's some heavy hitters right off at the beginning of the alphabet. Adventurous Impulse just wasn't a great card in the format. It just kind of spun your wheels and didn't really accomplish much. So trying to avoid playing Adventurous Impulse. It's like okay to play, but generally not great. And then Ancient Animus was just really bad. Like, I don't know why, but it just never performed. So I actually recommend just against playing Ancient Animus and just don't take it highly at all. You can sometimes play it, but overall it just wasn't a very strong card. I don't know exactly why. There just maybe weren't enough big green creatures, or maybe there was too much instant speed removal to interact with this, but Ancient Animus just was not an effective card, and you should probably avoid playing it if you are in green even. Next up, Crozen Druid was actually surprisingly solid. I think it's going to be generally underrated, but the 10 life could actually just win you the game against some decks in the format, and 3 mana 2/3 was not horrible. It stalled the game for you, and overall I was pretty happy playing Crozen Druid. I do want to quick note on Multani. This is the best mythic or / rare in the set. If you open a Multani in pack 2 or pack 3, it might even be worth switching into green just to play Multani, because you win such a large portion of the games that you play Multani. There's very few ways to like exile him, and he overall just going to win you the game like every time you cast him or draw him, because even if they kill him the first time, you just get him back, play him again, and he's just so big and so hard to deal with, and he has reach. So Multani is an incredible card, and you should pretty much take it every time you see it. So yeah. The best green common, Saproling Migration. This card is incredible. It looks incredible, and it is as good as it looks. It's a key card for the black-green Saproling archetype in pretty much any green deck, so take this card very highly if you see it. I do want to mention Sylvan Awakening is not very playable. It looks like a tough card to evaluate, but I do want to just reassure you this card is not very good, and you probably shouldn't play it. And now we are on to some of the multicolored cards. Most of these cards are fairly straightforward and powerful. Let's just see if there's any cards that aren't. Yeah, all these cards are just generally pretty good. Tiana is like the worst of these, but even she's pretty solid still. And in the colorless cards, there are some ones I want to talk about though. Ether Glider was just a card I wasn't a super big fan of. 3 mana 2/1 was just like not great, especially because it can't block. I wasn't a huge fan of Ether Glider. I never played that. Same with Amaranthine Wall. They just kind of go around the wall at a certain point, and yeah, wall is just not super powerful either. Candle was fine. There's one card in particular that I'm looking for here. Oh, Icy Manipulators, by the way, is like the best card to open the set. You pretty much always take this pack 1, pick 1, because it's just going to go into any deck, and it's going to be very powerful in any deck, and you're guaranteed to play it. So Icy Manipulator, one of those cards that if you open it, you're pretty much guaranteed to take it. Don't get too fancy and take like a common over this. Just always take the Icy Manipulator if you see it. And then where is the card that I'm looking? Oh, Jousting Lance is good in like Saproling type decks. It's hard to evaluate equipment, but I think Jousting Lance is going to be underrated by a lot of people, because Jousting Lance was actually very solid, and the first strike is very relevant. So 1 copy of Jousting Lance in a deck that has several Saproling generators is actually quite nice. So keep that in mind. And then finally, there it is, Navigator's Compass. Navigator's Compass is unplayable. Do not play Navigator's Compass. It could potentially be playable in some deck if you're super fancy, but I would very highly recommend against playing this, especially if you're newer to the format, because Navigator's Compass is just so hard. I personally never played the card. There are some scenarios where I would play it, like if I had like a Lich's Mastery or something like that, but just don't play Navigator's Compass and you'll win a lot more than you would otherwise. Similarly, don't play Shield of the Realm, don't play Short Sword, don't play Sparring Construct. Those cards are all just, they don't do enough to justify a card. Skittering Surveyor, though, is a card that a lot of people are going to underrate, and Skittering Surveyor is actually quite nice. It's one of the only sources of mana fixing in the format outside of the green mana fixing, and is therefore going to be very powerful in your decks if you want to splash, and so it's just a good early pick. It also just gets you deeper in your deck. It also just helps you just hit your land drops in a normal deck, and it's overall the card that you're going to be very happy taking early because it just gives you so much flexibility later on in the draft. So Skittering Surveyor is a card that I think is going to be underrated, and you should probably be taking this a little bit higher than you might think. And yeah, that is going to do it for the cards. The memorials are all pretty good. Relatively straightforward. I think Zalfrin Void's unplayable, and yeah, that is all of the cards. Let me know what you thought of this little overrated, underrated. I know I obviously wasn't going to talk about every card in this type of video, but I did want to see what you, I did want to share a little bit of the knowledge and hopefully get you ready for your own drafts of the format. So let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Remember to hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in my next video.